And joining us now to have this debate, Democratic analyst Liz Chadderdon, who is Skyping in from the nation's capital, and here on set with us, managing editor of the Shark Tank, Javier Manjarres. Javier, good to have you. Did I do okay today?
Impressed. You're getting better every week.
Thank you, Javier.
He rolled the R's.
He did.
Trying to roll the R's, and we're not going to roll over you, Javier, since you're here beside us right now. To you first, do you agree with Speaker Boehner's claims about the current president?
I agree with his claims, but I think after 6 years of this, now he decides to come out and threaten a lawsuit. Not just file a lawsuit, he's threatening him. So I question the motive behind it and why he's actually doing this.
So when you say you question his motive, can you be more specific?
Well, look, he's in an uphill battle. His re-election next year for speakership, and the speakership is next year. I was just in Washington yesterday, and the sentiment is they want to oust him. There's a lot of conservative members of the House, the GOP caucus, that do not want him in. They think he's failed. He has failed leadership, just like he calls Obama's leadership failure. They called his leadership a failure. I think he's just doing it to win brownie points with some of these conservatives who've been calling for a lawsuit against Obama's overreach in power for years. And now he all of a sudden does it on the heels of Eric Cantor's dismissal last week.
Well, this has to be music to the ears of Democratic consultant Liz Chadderdon. Liz, it's always at some peril when we ask folks across the aisle to offer a schematic as to the motives of their loyal opposition. But in this instance, do you agree with Javier about the timing and what the speaker has suggested?
Not entirely. I mean, I will agree with Javier that the current speaker Boehner is in deep trouble for retaining his speakership next year. But ever since he came to power in 2010, or on election night 2010, he has had a difficult time maintaining power within a very contentious caucus. He faces an insurrection a day within that caucus. And the truth of the matter is in the wake of Cantor, what Boehner knows is there is no piece of legislation that he can get through his caucus ever again. Nothing is going to get done. We are at a complete stalemate. And therefore, the only thing Boehner can do is to attack the presidency and apparently file a lawsuit against the President of the United States, because he can't actually do his job as Speaker, which is to pass legislation. It's not going to happen. We're not going to see immigration reform. We're not going to see minimum wage reform. We're not going to see anything happen in this Congress, certainly for the remainder of this election year. So I agree that the timing has to do with his speakership, but I think his motivation is completely different than what Javier is saying.
Well, I beg to differ, because I had took an elevator ride yesterday with Democrat leader Javier Becerra, and he told me, hey, it's going to happen this year. We're going to get immigration reform. Again,
he's
that's
wrong.
Well, then he's wrong.
And he's lying.
This is very refreshing.
It's not going to happen. Because the Tea Party caucus would never vote for it. And if Boehner doesn't have the Tea Party caucus, he doesn't have a speakership, and everybody in Washington knows it.
It's interesting to see these lines cross. Liz, I hope you're right. I would take polite exception with the notion that, quote, nothing is going to happen, because there is low-hanging fruit where there are areas of agreement within the House Republican Conference. They have the majority. They can pass it. Now, Harry Reid can let those bills pile up like newspapers when families are on vacation at the front door of the Senate, and in that sense, things don't get accomplished. But there are widespread items where there is a GOP consensus, and those bills can be passed.
Like what?
Well, let's take, for example, actions to deal with the Environmental Protection Agency and the president's, quote, use of the pen and phone. You can go in within the appropriations process and right now make efforts to say, rather than filing a lawsuit, legislatively say, you know what, we've got to cut spending in these areas because constitutionally, this regulatory panel is exceeding its original mission. That's one example. There is always the notion of tax reform. Dave Camp talked about it on the Ways and Means Committee. And there are issues dealing with our military and our national sovereignty, quite apart from, quote, immigration reform. So there's plenty that could be worked on within the Republican Congress.
But Boehner knows well that all of that will die in the Senate. He knows that. He knows that anything dealing with the new EPA regulations will die in the Senate, and that's why he's not bringing it up. Because at this point, the only thing John Boehner can do to stay in the news and to look relevant is to attack the president. That's it. It's the only power he has.
Well, we'll get back to Boehner in a second, but Javier, I think you have something you want to say here.
Liz, why does everything die in the Senate? Why can't we get anything passed in the
Because the
Senate?
legislation coming out of the Republican House is generally pretty crazy. And
Crazy in what regard?
Is actually standing in between, the American people and complete chaos. Really? We really think the EPA is overreached in attempting to regulate polluters in this country? Really?
Well, Liz, why don't we just for a moment go back to talking about what we were originally talking about, and that is the president using executive orders, making executive orders. Now Republicans are accusing him of being kind of, dictator-like. But when you look at the records, when you look at National Archives, actually, President Bush issued more executive orders than Obama. What's your response to that?
You're absolutely right. And in fact, every president for the last 30 years, the last 4 presidents who have served 2 terms, they all had the exact same number of executive orders at this point in their 2-year terms. So you're absolutely right. And in fact, the words imperial presidency came out of Speaker Pelosi's mouth when she was Speaker of the House and George W. Bush was president. So the truth is this is a washed out argument. We've heard it before. It's nothing more than Boehner having nothing else to say because he has no power and can't move anything, and all he can do is attack the president.
Javier, what do you think about that?
I agree with her as far as Boehner's power being diminished. Again, it's not about how many executive orders you've passed. It's the quality of the executive order, what type of executive orders. Here he is, executive orders against gun control, immigration reform. These are big issues that affect all Americans.
Liz, you mentioned Nancy Pelosi, and we just couldn't end this portion of our program without hearing from the former Speaker and current Democrat leader. And she finds Speaker Boehner an inviting target. Here's what she had to say.
I make of it as subterfuge. As I said, they're doing nothing here. And so they have to give some aura of activity. You can just go on the internet and you can see what they're screaming about there. There'll be a reflection of it here. So in any, I thought there really needs to be an adult in that room of the Republican caucus.
Ah, yes, the continued disparagement of all things Republican, how they could never have any seriousness of purpose, and how they should not listen to the voice of the people. And Liz, this is the small d democratic process for the big D to the people who have legitimate concerns?
Exactly what concerns are you speaking about? I actually think the Republicans are sitting on their hands, as we've discussed, and Boehner is doing out stupid and taxpayer dollar wasting lawsuits against the president, who is actually doing Boehner's job for him, because Boehner can't pass any legislation. So if the American people want their Congress to get off their butts and actually pass legislation, then they should elect Congress members who are interested in doing that, because the Republican Congress is not.
So what Liz is saying is that every Republican-led Congress has been bogus and has no substance behind it. It's anti-American. That's what she's saying. Every single bill.
Name one.
I'm asking you. You're saying that everything is coming out of
the president's desk. It's been signed into law.
I'm asking you, every single bill.
I'm asking you. You're the Republican on the line. You tell me.
Well, you're making the assertion that the Republican caucus is pulling out just a bunch of gibberish, and that these are bills that are un-American. So I'm asking you, is every single bill that's coming out of Congress from the House, yes or no? Every single bill, is it all un-American?
My mouth, but more importantly,
simple yes or no question. Yes or no?
Anything that the Republican Congress has done as a Republican, I think that says a lot.
Well, Liz Chadderdon, we appreciate the chat with you today. Javier Manjarres, as always, good to have you here. It's a contentious discussion that we hope to continue in the days ahead as we invite both of you back for interesting perspectives on the party in Washington, D.C. Your take on this, and unlike former Speaker Pelosi, if you go to your computer, you can feel free to shout. Put it in all caps. Tweet us at NewsmaxTV, #, America's Forum. There's also email, our address, connect@newsmaxtv.com. And don't forget Facebook. Our Faces coming right back. Stay tuned.